Hello everyone. In today's video, I bring you an impressive and transformative account that will stir your emotions. We will meet Astrid Calloway, a woman who faced the abyss of an abusive relationship, went through a near-death experience, and returned with a powerful and divine message. What she saw on the other side, and the command she received, is something that will leave you speechless. So, don't forget to give this video a like. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any content like this, and hit the notification bell to receive all updates. Now, get ready for this emotional journey filled with revelations. My name is Astrid Calloway, and what I am about to share with you is not just a story, but a testimony of transformation. It's an account of a journey that took me beyond the boundaries of life as we know it, an experience that redefined my understanding of existence, death, and everything in between. I was born and raised in West Salem, Oregon, in a large and loving family. We were 5 siblings in total, and our childhood was filled with adventures and laughter. At that time, the world seemed like a place of endless possibilities, and I looked toward the future with optimism and excitement. At the age of 27, driven by a desire for change and new opportunities, I decided to move to Santa Barbara, California. It was 1985. And I was full of dreams and expectations for this new phase of my life. It was during this time that I met Henry, the man who would become my husband. At first, our relationship seemed perfect. Henry was attentive, affectionate, and I believed I had found my safe harbor. But life has a peculiar way of surprising us, not always in positive ways. Over time, what seemed like a fairy tale began to turn into a nightmare. Henry, whom I thought to be my protector, became my tormentor. The abuse began subtly, almost imperceptibly. A derogatory comment here, an outburst of anger there. Slowly, I distanced myself from my family and friends, isolated in a world that grew smaller and more suffocating. The years went by, and I found myself trapped in a vicious cycle of abuse and false promises of change. Every attempt to escape was meticulously sabotaged by Henry, who alternated between displays of regret and veiled threats. I felt powerless, as though sinking in quicksand, unable to find a way out. It was in this context that, in December 1987, the incident occurred that would change my life forever. During a particularly heated argument, Henry pushed me with such force that I suffered a severe spinal injury. The pain was excruciating, and the doctors diagnosed a ruptured disc that seriously affected my mobility. A surgery was scheduled to fix the problem. I was apprehensive but also hopeful. Maybe, I thought, this would be the opportunity I needed to get away from Henry, to start rebuilding my life. Little did I know that the surgery would be the catalyst for an experience that would transcend everything I knew about life and death. As I prepared for the procedure, a mixture of emotions consumed me. Fear of the unknown, anxiety about the outcome, and a small spark of hope that things might improve. At that moment, lying on the hospital stretcher, I had no idea that I was about to embark on a journey that would change not only my perspective on life, but my very essence as a human being. The experience I lived through that December day in 1987 went beyond anything I could have imagined. It was a deep dive into the waters of the unknown, a glimpse of something greater than ourselves. And it is this story, my story, that I want to share with you now. The day of the surgery arrived with a mix of apprehension and hope. I remember waking up early, my heart heavy with thoughts of Henry and what the future held. As I prepared to go to the hospital, I felt a strange calm envelop me, as if a part of me knew that something significant was about to happen. At the hospital, I was greeted by a kind nursing team who prepped me for the procedure. Lying on the stretcher, I watched the medical staff bustling about, each performing their role with almost mechanical precision. Dr. William Hargrove, my neurosurgeon, came to see me before the surgery. His presence was reassuring, and he once again explained the details of the procedure. "Astrid," he said, "we are going to do a myelogram before the main surgery. It's a routine procedure to get a better view of the spine. Don't worry, it's a safe procedure." I nodded, trying to stay calm. As they wheeled me into the examination room, I couldn't help but notice the distinctive hospital smell, a mix of disinfectant and something indefinable that always made me uneasy. The X-ray technician positioned me in the machine, explaining each step of the process. I felt the needle enter my spine to inject the contrast. That's when something began to go wrong. Suddenly, I felt increasing pressure in my chest, as if the air was being forced out of my lungs. "Something's wrong," I managed to say, my voice barely a whisper. I saw panic in the technician's eyes as he realized I was hyperventilating. My vision began to darken at the edges, and I heard distant voices shouting for help. The last thing I remember was the sensation of falling into a dark, endless abyss. And then, everything changed. The darkness dissipated, and I found myself floating above the examination table. It was as if I had freed myself from all physical constraints. I looked down and saw my own body, motionless and pale, as the medical team worked frantically to revive me. It was a surreal feeling. I should have been terrified, but I wasn't. On the contrary, I felt a profound and inexplicable peace. There was no pain, no fear, just a serenity that I had never experienced before. I watched, fascinated, as Dr. Hargrove rushed into the room. His skilled hands began chest compressions on my lifeless body. A nurse placed an oxygen mask on my face, while another prepared the defibrillator. "Come on, Astrid," I heard Dr. Hargrove murmur. "Stay with us." It was strange to see my own body like that. As a distant spectator, I realized I was no longer connected to it. But oddly enough, that didn't scare me. I felt free, light, as if I had shed a burden I hadn't even known I was carrying. That's when I noticed something else. A presence beside me, a light so bright and welcoming it defied description. It wasn't a light I saw with my eyes, but something I felt with my entire being. It was as if love itself had taken form, wrapping me in a cosmic embrace. As I floated there between two worlds, I felt I was on the brink of a profound revelation. Something was about to change, and I knew, deep down, that nothing would ever be the same after this. The presence I felt beside me was indescribable in human terms. It was as though all the understanding I had of love, compassion, and acceptance was just a fraction of what I was experiencing at that moment. The light wasn't just something I saw. It was something that surrounded me, permeated me, transformed me. In that light, I felt completely exposed, but not in an uncomfortable way. It was as if all my secrets, fears, and insecurities were known and yet totally accepted. There was no judgment, only deep and unconditional understanding. I tried to speak, but I realized I didn't need words. My thoughts and feelings were immediately understood by this presence. Then I began to see flashes of my life, not like a linear movie, but as interconnected moments, each with deep meaning. I saw my childhood in West Salem, the moments of joy with my siblings, the first disappointments, the hopes and dreams of youth. I saw the moment I met Henry, the initial glow of our relationship, and how that glow gradually turned into shadows. Every moment of abuse, every cruel word, every broken promise, it was all there. But instead of feeling pain or anger, I experienced deep understanding. I saw how fear had kept me trapped, how I had allowed my own light to slowly fade away. The divine presence didn't speak, but it communicated. I felt, more than heard, a clear message. You have a choice. You always have. It was as if a veil had been lifted from my eyes. I realized that even in the darkest moments, I had the power to choose, to change, to free myself. The love I felt at that moment wasn't directed solely at me, but at everyone. I understood that Henry, with all his flaws, was also part of this universal love, even if he didn't recognize or act according to it. In that instant of cosmic clarity, I realized that my journey on Earth wasn't over. There was a greater purpose waiting for me, a mission that only I could fulfill. I thought of my children. how they needed me, not just physically, but as an example of strength and love. I need to go back, I thought, and immediately felt the approval of the divine presence. It was then that I experienced something even deeper. The light began to show me possibilities, paths my life could take if I chose to return. I saw myself leaving Henry, rebuilding my life, finding strength I never knew I had. I saw myself helping others who were going through similar situations, sharing my story, and inspiring change. But the choice was mine. The divine presence wasn't forcing me into anything, just showing me the potential that existed within me. I felt such a deep love for this presence, such immense gratitude, that it felt like my being would explode with emotion. At that moment, I made my decision. I chose to return, to face my fears, reclaim my life, and live the purpose that had been shown to me. As soon as I made that choice, I felt a force pulling me back. The light began to fade, but not in a sad or frightening way. It was as if it was saying, "Go. Live. Love. I will always be with you." With a sudden jolt of reality, I felt myself being pulled back into my body. The peace and serenity of the experience still echoed within me, but now mixed with an urgency to live, to change, to be who I was meant to be. Returning to my body was like plunging into cold water. Suddenly, all the physical sensations returned at once: the pain, the discomfort, the weight of my own existence. I opened my eyes, and the hospital's fluorescent lights momentarily blinded me. The voices around me, once distant, were now sharp and urgent. "She's back," I heard someone exclaim, their voice filled with relief and surprise. Dr. Hargrove was leaning over me, his eyes wide with astonishment. "Astrid, can you hear me?" he asked, his voice trembling. I tried to speak, but my throat was dry and sore. I could only manage a slight nod. The medical team around me seemed to be in a state of shock. Later, I found out that I had been dead for nearly 4 minutes, enough time for them to almost give up on resuscitation. As they checked my vital signs and adjusted the equipment, I tried to process what had happened. The experience I'd had felt so real, so vivid. It was hard to believe it had lasted only a few minutes. It felt like I had lived an eternity in that brief time. The days that followed were a confusing mix of medical tests, specialist visits, and endless questions. Everyone wanted to know what had happened, how I felt, if I remembered anything. But how could I explain something that seemed beyond words? I tried to tell Dr. Hargrove about my experience, the light, the sense of peace, the revelations I had. He listened attentively, without judgment, but I could see in his eyes a mix of fascination and skepticism. The other doctors were less receptive. I heard terms like oxygen deprivation hallucination and chemical reaction in the brain. Their explanations seemed so inadequate, so limited compared to what I had experienced. But the hardest part was trying to explain it to Henry. When he came to visit me in the hospital, I could see the fear in his eyes, not for me, but for what my experience might mean for him, for the control he had over me. I tried to share with him what had happened, the transformation I felt, but his responses were dismissive, almost hostile. "You're confused, Astrid," he said, his voice a mix of condescension and irritation. "It's the stress from the surgery." As I physically recovered, I felt a deep change happening within me. The peace and clarity I had experienced during my near-death experience hadn't completely left me. It was as if a seed had been planted inside me, a seed of strength and purpose that was beginning to sprout. I started to see my life with new eyes. The things that had once seemed important to me, the expectations of others, the fear of judgment, the need to please, now seemed insignificant. What really mattered was living authentically, loving unconditionally, and helping others. As I prepared to leave the hospital, I knew I was about to embark on a new journey. A journey of self-discovery, healing, and above all, liberation. The near-death experience wasn't the end, it was just the beginning. Returning home after the hospital experience was like entering a completely new world, even though everything around me seemed exactly the same. The house that had once suffocated me now felt like a temporary setting. Henry's controlling stares, which once paralyzed me with fear, were now like faint shadows compared to the light I carried within. In the first few days, I kept silent, observing. I observed the family dynamics I had allowed to develop over the years. I watched how my children tiptoed around their father, how their laughter died down when Henry entered the room. And for the first time, I clearly saw how I had been complicit in this situation, letting fear dictate our lives. It was during a particularly tense evening that I took my first step toward change. Henry had come home in a foul mood, complaining about dinner and criticizing the children's mess. Instead of trying to calm him down or apologizing as I normally would, I simply got up from the table. "Kids," I said calmly, "let's go for a walk in the garden." Henry's expression shifted from surprise to anger in a matter of seconds. "Astrid, no one is going anywhere until this mess is cleaned up," he growled. I felt the old fear trying to take hold of me, but the memory of the light I had experienced gave me strength. I looked Henry directly in the eyes and said, "We're going for a walk. When we come back, we'll clean up the table together, as a family." The look of shock on Henry's face almost made me laugh. It was as if he were seeing a completely different person in front of him. Without waiting for his response, I took the children's hands and we went out to the garden. That small action was the catalyst for a series of changes. I began setting boundaries, expressing my opinions, and making decisions without asking for permission. At first, Henry reacted with more aggression, trying to regain control, but each time he raised his voice or made threats, I remembered the peace and unconditional love I had experienced. It gave me the strength to stand firm. At the same time, I began seeking external help. I found a support group for women in abusive situations and, for the first time, shared my story with others who truly understood. Their stories of overcoming inspired me and gave me hope. It was at one of these meetings that I met Isabel, a woman with a strong spiritual connection who became my friend and mentor. Isabel helped me process my near-death experience, offering a perspective that went beyond the skeptical scientific explanations I had heard in the hospital. "Astrid," she said to me one day, "what you experienced was an awakening. The universe showed you your true essence, free from the limitations of ego and fear. Now, your mission is to bring a little of that light into your everyday life." Her words resonated deeply within me. I began meditating, practicing mindfulness, and reconnecting with my spirituality in a way I never had before. Each practice brought me closer to that feeling of peace and love I experienced during my near-death experience. As I changed, I noticed my children were changing too. They started to express themselves more, laugh more freely, and seek my presence during difficult moments. This only strengthened my determination to create a healthy and loving family environment. Henry, on the other hand, seemed more distant and confused with each passing day. There were moments when I caught glimpses of the man I had fallen in love with, moments when he seemed to want to change. But those moments were brief, quickly giving way to the old patterns of control and manipulation. That was when I realized the change I was seeking could not happen within that marriage. The seed of strength that had been planted in me during my near-death experience was now blossoming, and I knew it was time to make the most difficult and courageous decision of my life. I had reached a point where I could no longer ignore the truth my near-death experience had revealed. I deserved to live a full life, free from fear and abuse. The decision to leave Henry was not easy, but it was necessary, not just for me, but for my children as well. One night, after the children had gone to bed, I sat down with Henry in the living room. The air was heavy with unspoken tension between us. I took a deep breath, seeking that inner strength I had discovered during my experience. "Henry," I began, my voice surprisingly firm, "we can't keep going like this. Our marriage is over." I saw a mix of emotions cross his face: shock, anger, fear. He tried to argue, threaten, and plead, but I remained resolute. For the first time, I saw clearly the scared and insecure man behind the facade of control. "I loved you, Henry," I said softly. "But love shouldn't hurt. It shouldn't diminish us. We need to go our separate ways now." The days that followed were a whirlwind. Contacting a lawyer, explaining the situation to the children, facing the reactions of family and friends. Each step was a challenge. There were moments when fear threatened to overwhelm me again, but then I would remember the light, the unconditional love I had experienced. That gave me the strength to continue. The divorce process was difficult and, at times, ugly. Henry alternated between trying to emotionally manipulate me and making veiled threats. But with the support of my help group, Isabel, and some family members who understood my situation, I managed to stay strong. One of the most painful parts was seeing how it affected my children. They were confused, scared by the changes. I spent sleepless nights questioning whether I was doing the right thing. But then, I began to notice small changes in them, more frequent smiles, tighter hugs, more open conversations. Slowly, the atmosphere in our home began to change. I obtained a restraining order against Henry after a particularly frightening incident. It was a moment of clarity for me. I realized that the man I had once loved was lost in his own demons, and it was not my responsibility to save him. We moved to a small apartment on the other side of town. It was smaller than our old house, but for the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe freely. We decorated it together, the children and I, turning that space into our sanctuary. One night, as I was putting my children to bed, my youngest daughter hugged me tightly and whispered, "Mommy, I'm happy we're here. I'm not scared anymore." Her words were like a balm to my soul. I realized that by choosing to free myself, I was also freeing my children. We were starting a new chapter in our lives, a chapter of healing, growth, and true love. Lying in bed that night, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this point, the pain, the fear, the near-death experience, the struggle to free myself. All of it was part of my path. I felt a deep gratitude for the strength I had discovered within myself, and for the opportunity to begin again. As I drifted off to sleep, I felt a familiar sensation, that same peace and love I had experienced during my near-death experience. But this time, it wasn't something distant or unreachable. It was something I was bringing into my daily life, one step at a time. The months following my separation were an emotional roller coaster. There were days when I felt invincible, ready to conquer the world. On others, the weight of the changes and responsibilities felt crushing. It was during this time that I truly began to understand the real meaning of healing. I started attending therapy regularly. My therapist, Dr. Martinez, helped me process not only the trauma of my abusive marriage, but also my near-death experience. She was one of the few professionals who didn't dismiss my experience as a mere hallucination. "Astrid," she said to me during one session, "regardless of the origin of that experience, the important thing is the impact it had on you. Let's work to integrate that wisdom into your daily life." That process of integration wasn't easy. I had to face parts of myself I had ignored for years, my repressed anger, my fear of abandonment, my tendency to sacrifice myself for others. Each session was like uncovering a new layer, sometimes painful, but always liberating. Alongside therapy, I continued to explore my spirituality. Isabel introduced me to meditation and yoga. At first, I found it difficult to quiet my mind, always filled with worries and plans. But with practice, I began to experience moments of peace similar to what I had felt during my near-death experience. One practice that became particularly meaningful to me was journaling. Every night before bed, I would write about my thoughts, feelings, and experiences of the day. Sometimes, it was pages and pages of venting. Other times, it was just a few lines of gratitude. This habit helped me process my emotions and see my progress over time. My relationship with my children was also undergoing a process of healing. We had many difficult conversations, tears were shed, But there were also moments of laughter and genuine connection. I began to see my children not just as kids who needed protection, but as resilient individuals with their own healing journeys. One day, during a walk in the park with them, my oldest son suddenly stopped and hugged me. "Mom," he said, "you seem different now. Happier." His words touched me deeply. I realized that my healing wasn't just for me, but was positively impacting those around me. Throughout this process, I also had to deal with the practical consequences of my new life. Finding a job after years away from the workforce was challenging. There were moments of doubt and financial fear, but each small victory, a successful job interview, a compliment from a coworker, made me feel stronger and more capable. A crucial part of my healing journey was learning to forgive, not just Henry, but also myself. Forgiving myself for staying in an abusive relationship for so long, for not protecting my children sooner, for allowing my light to dim. That forgiveness didn't come all at once, but in small moments of understanding and compassion for myself. As I progressed in my healing journey, I began to feel a calling to share my story. Initially, it was just with other women in the support group. But soon, I realized that my experience, both of the abuse and the near-death experience, could help others who were going through similar situations. That's how I started giving small talks at community centers and support groups. Each time I shared my story, I felt like I wasn't just helping others, but also healing a part of myself. It was as if each word I spoke was another step toward becoming the woman I was meant to be. The healing journey is continuous, I've learned. There isn't a final point where we can say, "Now I'm completely healed." But there is progress, there is growth, and there is an indescribable beauty in rediscovering and rebuilding yourself, one day at a time. 2 years have passed since I took the courageous step of leaving Henry and restarting my life. Those years have been filled with challenges, but also with growth and incredible discoveries. I felt like a phoenix rising from the ashes, stronger and wiser than ever. My career had taken an unexpected but rewarding turn. I began working as a counselor at a support center for victims of domestic violence. My own experience, combined with the training I received, allowed me to deeply connect with the women who sought help. Each story I heard, each life I helped transform, reaffirmed my belief in the power of human resilience. It was during this time that I met Jonas Crawford. He was a volunteer at the center, a kind and compassionate man with his own story of overcoming hardship. Our first meeting was casual, sharing a coffee during a break between sessions. But something about him piqued my curiosity. Unlike Henry, Jonas didn't try to impose or control. He listened attentively, asked insightful questions, and shared his own vulnerabilities with refreshing honesty. Over time, our friendship grew, and I found myself looking forward to our meetings. One day, while we were walking through a park near the center, Jonas told me about his own past. Sometimes we need to hit rock bottom to find the strength to climb back to the surface. His words resonated deeply with me. I realized that, in a way, my near-death experience was my own rock bottom, the moment when everything changed, when I found the strength to reclaim my life. As Jonas and I grew closer, I felt a familiar fear begin to surface. What if I was deluding myself again? What if, once again, I was mistaking control for love? I shared these concerns with my therapist, who encouraged me to trust in my newly discovered intuition. "Astrid," she said, "you are not the same woman you were before. Trust in your discernment. You now know the difference between a healthy relationship and a toxic one." Armed with that confidence, I decided to open my heart to the possibility of new love. Jonas and I started dating, taking things slow, always communicating openly about our fears and expectations. It was refreshing to be in a relationship where I felt truly seen and valued. Jonas encouraged me to pursue my dreams, celebrated my achievements, and supported me during difficult times. He was also wonderful with my children, approaching his role in our lives with respect and patience. A year after our first meeting, sitting in our favorite cafe, I found myself looking at Jonas and being flooded with a wave of gratitude, not just for him, but for the entire journey that had brought me to that moment. For the strength I discovered in myself, the courage to start over, the wisdom gained through pain and healing. In that moment, I vividly remembered the light I had experienced during my near-death experience. I realized that, in a way, I was bringing a bit of that light into the world through my work, my renewed love for life, and the genuine connections I was forming. I looked at Jonas and smiled. "You know," I said, "a few years ago, I never would have believed I could be this happy again." He took my hand, his eyes full of understanding. "Life has an amazing way of surprising us, doesn't it?" I nodded, feeling a deep peace. My journey was far from over, but now I knew that I had the tools and strength to face whatever challenges came my way. I had been reborn, not just as a survivor, but as a complete woman, ready to embrace all that life had to offer. As my life stabilized and I felt more secure in my new self, I began to feel a growing call to share my story on a wider scale. The occasional talks I gave at community centers and support groups no longer felt enough. There was an urgency in me, a burning desire to reach more people, to show them that transformation is possible, no matter how dark the situation may seem. It was around this time that I met Sarah, a local writer who frequented the center where I worked. She was researching for a book on resilience and overcoming trauma. After hearing my story, Sarah encouraged me to consider writing a book. At first, the idea scared me. Who was I to write a book? What did I have to say that hadn't already been said? But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that my unique experience, the combination of surviving an abusive relationship and having a profound near-death experience, could offer a valuable perspective to others. With the support of Jonas, my children, and my network of friends, I began writing. The process was intense and sometimes emotionally exhausting. Reliving certain memories was painful but also incredibly liberating. Each word I wrote seemed to release a little more of the weight I had been carrying. I decided to structure the book in 3 parts. My life before the near-death experience, the experience itself, and the transformation that followed. I wanted readers to understand not only the pivotal event, but the entire context surrounding it. As I wrote about my near-death experience, I struggled to capture the essence of that transcendental moment. How could I describe the indescribable light, the unconditional love, the feeling of being connected to everything? The words felt inadequate, but I did my best to convey the depth and impact of that experience. I felt a mix of exhaustion and euphoria. I handed it to Sarah, who kindly offered to review it and help me find a publisher. The weeks of waiting were agonizing, but when I finally received the feedback, I was thrilled. Sarah believed the book had the potential to touch many lives. The publishing process was an emotional roller coaster. There were rejections, of course, but also genuine interest. Eventually, a small publisher specializing in self-help and spirituality literature decided to publish my book. On the day of the launch, I looked at the cover of my book, Beyond the Light, A Journey of Survival, Death and Rebirth, and I could hardly believe it. There was my story, ready to be shared with the world. The reactions to the book exceeded my wildest expectations. People who had experienced near-death events thanked me for giving voice to something they had struggled to express. One comment, in particular, stayed with me. It was from a young woman who had attempted suicide. She wrote, "Your book made me see that there is light even in the darkest moments. It made me want to live again." Reading those words brought me to tears. I realized that by sharing my story, I was truly bringing some of the light I had experienced into the world. I was fulfilling the purpose that had been revealed to me during my near-death experience. The opportunities that came after the book's publication were surprising. I was invited to speak at conferences, participate in podcasts, and appear on radio shows. "It's a daily effort," I answered honestly. "There are days when it's easier, and days when it's a challenge, but every morning, I remember that experience, that unconditional love I felt, and I try to bring a bit of that into each interaction, each moment. It's like watering a plant. You need to constantly nurture that connection with the light. As I looked at the attentive faces in the audience, I felt a wave of gratitude wash over me. Gratitude for the journey that brought me here, for the struggles that made me stronger, for the experience that transformed me, and above all, gratitude for the opportunity to share this light with others, to be a beacon of hope in a world that often seems so dark. I realized that my mission to share the light was just beginning. There was so much more to be done, so many more lives to touch, and I was ready for the challenge. Today, more than 3 decades after my near-death experience, I sit in my home office, surrounded by family photos, letters from readers, and memories of a life fully lived. The frightened and oppressed woman I once was seems like a distant memory, almost as if she were another person. Jonas and I have been married for 28 years now. Our journey together has been one of mutual growth, love, and understanding. He remains my greatest supporter, my safe harbor in moments of doubt. Our relationship is living proof that true and healthy love not only exists, but can flourish even after traumatic experiences. My children, now adults with families of their own, are my greatest source of pride. Seeing them overcome the trauma of their childhood and become compassionate and resilient individuals is one of the greatest joys of my life. They often tell me that my journey has inspired them to face their own challenges with courage. My work has evolved over the years. In addition to continuing to counsel survivors of abuse, I began focusing more on research into near-death experiences. I collaborated with scientists and researchers, seeking to better understand this phenomenon that changed my life so profoundly. One of the most rewarding projects I've undertaken was creating a foundation dedicated to supporting survivors of abuse who have also experienced near-death events. I discovered that this unique intersection of experiences often leaves people feeling isolated and misunderstood. Our foundation offers counseling, support groups, and resources to help these individuals integrate their experiences and use them as a transformative force in their lives. Reflecting on my journey, I realized that my near-death experience was much more than an isolated event. It was a wake-up call, an invitation to live a more authentic and meaningful life. The light I experienced that day continues to guide my actions and decisions. However, it would be dishonest to say that everything has been easy since then. There have been moments of doubt, periods of depression, days when the weight of the world felt overwhelming. But the difference now is that I have the tools to face these challenges. The peace and unconditional love I experienced during my near-death experience have become an anchor, something I can turn to in difficult times. One of the most profound lessons I've learned is that our mission in life is not to achieve a state of perfection or constant happiness. Instead, it's about growing, learning, and above all, loving ourselves and others, despite our imperfections and struggles. Another aspect that has become increasingly clear to me over the years is the interconnectedness of all things. That feeling of unity I experienced during my near-death experience wasn't an illusion. It's a fundamental truth of the universe that we often forget in our daily existence. Every act of kindness, every word of encouragement, every gesture of love has an impact far beyond what we can see or understand. As I grow older, I find myself thinking more about the legacy I will leave behind. Not in terms of fame or material wealth, but in the impact I've had on the lives I've touched. Every letter I receive from a reader who found hope in my words, every hug of gratitude from someone I've counseled, every smile from my grandchildren, these are the true treasures I've accumulated. There are still days when I wonder why I was chosen to have this transformative experience. Why me? What made me special? But then I remember that the question isn't why me, but rather, what will I do with it? Each of us has the potential to be a bearer of light in this world, whether or not we've had a near-death experience. As I look to the future, I feel a mix of anticipation and serenity. I know there is still work to be done, more lives to touch, more love to share. But I also know that when the time comes for me to make my final transition from this world, I will not be afraid. I've already glimpsed what lies beyond, and it's beautiful beyond words. For those reading this who are going through their own dark moments, I want you to know there is light waiting for you. Sometimes we need to go through the deepest darkness to truly appreciate the brightness. Don't give up. Your journey, as difficult as it may seem right now, has a purpose. And for those who, like me, have had the privilege of glimpsing something beyond this earthly existence, I remind you, we were touched by the light not just for our own benefit, but to share it with the world. Each day is an opportunity to bring a little of that unconditional love into our reality. My near-death experience taught me that life is precious, fragile, and infinitely beautiful. It is a gift we've been given, and our responsibility is to live it fully, love deeply, and constantly grow. As we continue our journey in this plane of existence, may we always remember the light that exists within each of us, a light that not even death can extinguish. If you enjoyed this beautiful spiritual testimony, leave a like, share your thoughts in the comments, subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to activate the notification bell so you can watch every new video and help us spread this message to more people. See you next time.